It's Tuesday, so it's time for another top 10 video. This time I'm going to be giving you my top 10 Warlock invocations. Given the fact that a Warlock's spell list is so small, their invocations are exceptionally important, so I'm going to give you what I think are my personal top 10. Not necessarily the best. I mean, a lot of them are probably going to be on the same lists, but they're my personal top 10. So if you want to see what those are, stay tuned. So anyway, I started blasting. What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and let's talk Warlock Invocations. So to do that, that's the rules, basically. It's got to be a Warlock Invocation. It has to be an official published source from either the Player's Handbook or Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Ideally, we'll get more in the future, but that's the list we have to go off now. And maybe I'll adjust this list if we do get more invocations down the road. But I wanted to talk to you about our sponsor for today, and that is my good friends at Hero Forge. If you're familiar, you've seen possibly Mini Ted here appearing in a couple of videos recently. And Mini Ted is a custom Hero Forge mini that I made on their website, heroforge.com. And as someone who backed their recent Kickstarter that just completed a few months ago, I have early access to the color tools. Normally, when you get a Hero Forge mini, it'll come out in sort of a printed plastic like this, or with a primer or something like that. This actually came printed in color. So what you see here in front of me is how the mini arrived. It was printed in color, and thanks to them that I was able to get access to this. So I'm very thankful of this and several other minis that I have access to. But it was really cool to just have a mini representation of myself. So Hero Forge is a website that allows you to go ahead and create custom minis. It's free to make minis. You can use them as character models if you're like me and aren't a very good artist in any way. That might help you visualize your character a little bit better. Every Tuesday, they release new content for today they released 2 new races, which was, I think, an angel-born and a devil-born race, and like expansive, massive wings for those races. Very cool stuff. So yeah, I would highly recommend you check out Hero Forge if you haven't already. Thank you once again to them for sponsoring the video. On to number 10. Number 10. Number 10 is Tomb of Levistus. I really love this invocation in concept. I've never seen it in play, and I don't know anyone who's actually taken it, but I just really, really like it, and I want to use it. So what is it? Well, one, it's a prerequisite. You have to be at least 5th level to access it. But as a reaction, when you take damage, you can entomb yourself in ice, which melts away at the end of your next turn. You gain 10 temporary hit points per Warlock level, right? So at the start of this, you're at minimum 50 temporary hit points, which take as much of the triggering damage as possible. Immediately after you take that damage, you gain vulnerability to fire damage, your speed is reduced to 0, and you are incapacitated. These effects, including any remaining temporary hit points, all end when the ice melts. Once you use this, you can't use it again until you take a short or long rest. So, I don't know. I just like the idea of, you say you manage to become a level 20 Warlock. Something hits you, and you can entomb yourself in ice and gain 200 temporary hit points. And it says it takes as much of the triggering damage as possible. It also says immediately after you take the damage, you gain vulnerability to fire. So I thought, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'm sure you guys will correct me, the way I had always thought it was, you gain whatever the temporary hit points are, you gain vulnerability to fire, and then that's when things are calculated. But the way I'm reading it now, it seems like I gain these temporary hit points, I take the damage, so if I have 50 temporary hit points at level 5 and I take 25 points of damage, I now have 25 temporary hit points, and then at that point is when I gain vulnerability to fire. I'm stuck in place, and I'm incapacitated. I don't know why I like this so much. I think it probably reminds me a lot of the Azula versus Katara fight in Avatar The Last Airbender, where she kind of like pulls up a big mound of ice, and they're both frozen in it. I think that's just the visual that I have whenever I think of entombing myself in ice. And I don't know, I just really like it, and I love to get a chance to play a Warlock. Really, I love to get a chance to play D&D really at all. I don't get that many options, and if I was able to do it, maybe I might Warlock a go and give that a try. Number 9. Number 9 is Lifedrinker. This is a level 12 requirement, and you have to be a Pact of the Blade Warlock. But it's the ultimate dream in my mind of any Pact of the Blade, and specifically probably any Hexblade, to get access to Lifedrinker. That's the cherry on top of your whole effort to get to this point, is when you hit a creature with your Pact weapon, the creature takes extra necrotic damage equal to your Charisma modifier. The thought process being, in theory, if you've done all of the things that are typical for being a Pact of the Blade, you now can do 2 attacks on your turn. In theory, you have maximum damage. So let's say you are a Hexblade and you do use Charisma. If you're swinging a Greatsword and you have the things that let you do that, your Greatsword would do 2d6. And let's say you happen to have 20 Charisma as well, so a +5 modifier. Your Greatsword swing would deal 2d6 plus 5 for your Charisma modifier for the base damage, plus an additional 5 for the necrotic damage from Lifedrinker. So right there, based on that, with no +1 weapons of any kind, you'd be dealing 2d6 plus 10 damage every time you hit. And really, that's the dream. Number 8. Number 8 is Voice of the Chainmaster. And this, I feel like, is probably more of a recon invocation than anything else. It does require Pact of the Chain, which, unfortunately, in my experience, I don't see a lot of Pact of the Chain, if ever, in any game that I've ever played. I see them occasionally, right? I can at least talk to one player that I've seen use Pact of the Chain, but they're a multi-class, so it's not like they put their whole stock in Warlock. More often than not, people can't. They're going the Blade route, and they're going to be a Hexblade, or they're going to take the book, because, let's be honest, the amount of versatility that the book gives you is pretty nutty. But if you do happen to be a Pact of the Chain, Voice of the Chainmaster, you can now communicate telepathically with your familiar and perceive through their senses as long as you're on the same plane of existence, which is normally not the case, right? Find familiar perceiving through your familiar's eyes is usually limited. I think it's 100 feet. But now, this is at the same plane of existence. You are the ultimate recon master. And remember, familiars can have blind sight. They can be like a tiny little spider that can sneak into places. You have a lot of really good options, in theory, with this. And additionally, while perceiving through your familiar senses, you can speak through the familiar in your own voice, even if your familiar is not capable of speech. So let's say you are using your familiar for recon. You can now talk using your voice to let people know, like, hey, this is Ted. I'm talking to you to tell you XYZ. This is what the mission is. This is the trigger. And then you send your familiar back. Again, never seen it in play, but I think it could be very good. And I'm sure people will tell me of examples where it was super useful for them as well. Number 7. Number 7, funnily enough, is another Pact of the Chain feature, and that is Gift of the Ever-Living Ones. When you regain hit points while your familiar is within 100 feet of you, treat any dice roll to determine the hit points you gain as having rolled the maximum value. So, for example, if someone is casting a higher level Cure Wounds, normally healing 5d8 hit dice worth, 5d8 hit points, for everybody else, they'd have to roll 5d8. For you, you would just get 40 straight hit points. And let me tell you, I do have this in one of my games, and nothing is more satisfying for any of the healers in the game than healing the character with Gift of the Ever-Living Ones, because it just feels so good to just be like, oh, yeah, you heal 24 hit points, you heal 50 hit points without having to roll. It just feels good, especially because it's whenever you regain hit points. So it doesn't necessarily have to be through healing magic per a spell, like Cure Wounds. If you're sort of a class that has a healing feature like a Dreams Druid or a Celestial Warlock, those also get maximized. And as a Pact of the Chain Warlock, depending on the familiar have, let's say it's an imp can turn invisible, right? So now no one knows your familiar's within 100 feet of you, but you still get the max healing, which is pretty nutty. And again, it's nice. Again, another thing I would love to try. I love to build a multi-class where I get to have a Pact of, like, where that's not my main identity, but I can be Pact of the Chain familiar and enjoy that. I would love that. Maybe one day. Number 6. Number 6 is Eldritch Smite. Why not take your Warlock and make them better than a Paladin in some respect? And that's what Eldritch Smite lets you do. It is a 5th level requirement, Pact of the Blade only. Once per turn, when you hit a creature with your Pact weapon, you can expend a Warlock spell slot to deal a d8 force damage to the target, plus another d8 per level of the spell slot. So that functions identically to a Paladin's Smite, where a Paladin deals a d8 force damage, or sorry, d8 radiant damage, or basically 2d8 radiant damage with a first level spell, and a d8 for each level above. However, the Paladins maxes out using 4th level spell slots, meaning they can only deal, 2 for first level, then 3 for second, 4 for third, and 5d8 total at the 4th level slot. The Warlock does not have that limitation, so they can deal 6d8 force damage using a 5th level slot. And on top of that, you can knock the target prone if they are huge size or smaller. So this is kind of really baked into that ultimate Hexblade build where you're kind of taking all of the really powerful melee options. And especially if you have 2 attacks, you could, in theory, smite on the first one, knock them prone, and then smite on the second one with advantage and hope to fish for that crit. And you're a Warlock, right? So your spell slots are going to come back on a short rest. So you can get these kind of Eldritch Smites per short rest, and then if you multi-class too to get more spell slots, you could basically be a Paladin without actually being a Paladin. Number 5. Number 5 is Visions of Distant Realms, which is a prerequisite level 15. You can cast Arcane Eye at will without expending a spell slot. I'll be honest with you, I did not even know this was an invocation. Arcane Eye is a very powerful spell. It's one of my absolute favorite spells if you have access to it, and it can absolutely destroy a dungeon in the moments of surprise housed in a dungeon if you're able to use Arcane Eye for recon. Typically, in my mind, most of the reason it's never prepared is because it takes that spell slot, but you can cast this at will without expending a spell slot. So Arcane Eye is a concentration for an hour, but you can cast it unlimitedly, so who cares? You create an invisible magical eye that hovers within 30 feet of you. You can receive mental information from the eye. It has normal vision and dark vision out to 30 feet, and it can look in all directions. It also doesn't say that you're blinded while you're using Arcane Eye, so in theory, you can still see out of your own eyes while you're also perceiving this information. As an action, you can move it up to 30 feet. There's no limit to how far away the eye can move, but it can't enter another plane of existence. And the solid barrier blocks it, but it can pass through an opening as small as 1 inch in diameter. 1 inch in diameter is very tiny. So I've used Arcane Eye as a wizard to map out dungeons before we go in it to find the locations of enemies to kind of see through it. And pairing Visions of Distant Realms with the Pact of the Chain, being able to speak at Voice of the Chainmaster, which is right below it. Comparing those 2 spells together, those 2 invocations together, you can become the ultimate recon expert. And really, you're still going to have all of your spell slots at this point. You're not wasting any of your limited Warlock resources. Number 4. Number 4 is Eldritch Sight. You can cast Detect Magic at will without expending a spell slot. You get this at level... You can have this as early as level 2 when you gain access to invocations. And that is never not useful to have. So sure, you can be a... you could be a... I don't know, a druid or a cleric or a wizard and have access to this as a ritual. Wizard typically being the best one because they can do it without having to actually prepare it, whereas the other classes would have to prepare it. But it's still going to take you 10 minutes to cast Detect Magic, and sometimes you just want to know, is this magical? And the Warlock can be like, don't worry about it, I'll just do it at will, not a big deal. Also, the fact that you are limited on your spell slot options as a Warlock because you only have a maximum of 4 slots. Taking one up to use Detect Magic seems like kind of a waste, so having it at will without expending a slot is super useful. And as in the one game that I am playing in, having someone in the party who has Detect Magic as a wizard saves me so much because I can just ask them, hey, can you check if that's magical? And they can just, boop, it's magical, no it's not, whatever. It's super useful, I think. I also feel like every casting class, honestly, in the game should have access to Detect Magic as a ritual regardless of whatever they are. I feel like in the nature of a world where everyone or most people can gain access to magic, having Detect Magic as a ritual just seems to make sense to me, especially for all full casting classes. Like, why can a wizard get it without having to basically spend any slots by just having it from their spell book, but everybody else has to prepare it? And like, you know, or if you're like a bard, you have to choose it as a spell known, or a sorcerer. And then again, at least bards can cast it as a ritual, sorcerers can't. Anyway, that's not a diatribe about detect magic, but Eldritch Sight is a very good invocation. Number 3. Number 3 is arguably one of the most versatile options here, and that is the Book of Ancient Secrets, but that does require you to be Pact of the Tome, which is pretty much the whole reason you go down that route, which is now you can inscribe magical rituals into your Book of Shadows. Choose 2 first-level spells that have the ritual tag from any class of spell list. You automatically add those to your book. And they don't count against any spells that you know. With your Book of Shadow in hand, you can cast those spells as a ritual. You can also cast a Warlock spell you know as this is actually something I'm learning right now that I did not know. You can also cast a Warlock spell you know as a ritual if it has the ritual tag. I didn't actually know that part about the book. I never read that. So there you go. And it should be said they can only be cast as rituals. And on your adventures, you can add other rituals to your Book of Shadows. When you find such a spell, you can add it to the book if the spell's level is equal to or less than half your Warlock level, rounded up, and if you can spare the time to transcribe it. For each level of spell, the transcription process takes 2 hours and 50 gold pieces for the rare inks needed to inscribe it. But this essentially gains you access to every ritual spell in the game. There are very few. A wizard typically has access to almost every ritual spell in the game. There are a few exceptions. This, in theory, will let you have all of them. And having all of those spells as rituals, being able to cast them as rituals without having to spend spell slots, is pretty powerful, right? You already could get Detect Magic at will, but now you could have Leomin's Tiny Hut and Rary's Telepathic Bond and other very powerful ritual spells without needing to do anything except transcribe them into this book. I guess I also have a video on ritual spells, so that would be a good resource for what spells to put in it. Number 2. Number 2 is Devil's Sight. You can see normally in darkness, both magical and non-magical, to a distance of 120 feet. Dark vision, as we've stated in many videos, is exceptionally powerful, a very powerful tool, though often ruled incorrectly, as I put out in a different video, truly explaining how dark vision works. But it's also very hit or miss, right? Either the whole party has it or nobody has it, or it gets weird where are we doing torches, are we not? Typical dark vision is also a range of 60 feet, unless you're typically a race that has sunlight sensitivity, like a drow or a durger, or I think maybe Struckneblin gets 120 feet. But you would have it to 120 feet, and you can see through magical darkness, which gives you a whole ton of advantages, like dropping the darkness spell on top of you. You can now attack out of it completely unhindered, at advantage because you're hidden from your enemy. All enemy attacks against you have disadvantage because they can't see you. And for a cheap second level spell slot with a darkness spell, you just increase your survivability immensely. Pair that with other Warlock spells that kind of do the same things, like Shadow of Moil, or again, if you happen to be a Drow Warlock, you now have darkness as an innate ability that you can just do without having to spend any spell slots. It's very powerful. Again, you'll never be upset that you have it. I'm sure there'll be definitely situations where like, damn, I wish I'd taken Devil's Sight because I could see through this magical darkness. Yeah, it's just a very strong option. It's just, I'll talk more about it at the end. Number 1. And surprise, I'm sure surprising no one at all, number 1 is Agonizing Blast. The prerequisite is the Eldritch Blast cantrip, and when you cast Eldritch Blast, add your Charisma modifier to the damage it deals on a hit. If you're a Warlock, chances are 9 times out of 10, you're going to have this. I'm not going to say that everybody does, because that's not necessarily the case. And if you are truly focused on like the Hexblade, fighting with a weapon line, then you probably, it won't really matter to you too much because you'll be using your blade a lot. But you might still have Eldritch Blast as a cantrip, so you have an option for range, and being able to add Charisma modifier to that damage is going to be pretty powerful. It's a D10 force damage plus your Charisma modifier, making your minimum damage roll of 6 and your maximum 15. And remember, you do multiple damage rolls as you level up in Warlock, and you get multiple attack rolls, up to a total of 4 when you hit level 17 as your total character level. And each one of those is a separate attack, meaning each one of them has a chance to crit. So adding charisma modifier to the damage really makes you just a cantrip master, or really just an Eldritch Blast master, but makes you do some serious damage, and you can outpower in some cases at a higher level. You may be beating out more martial characters depending on what they are with just your Eldritch Blast if you happen to roll well. So that's my number 1. It's unfortunate because the list of invocations is so short. For the most part, you're going to see the same invocations pop up on just about every single Warlock that you play with, right? I mean, there's a few other options here that I mentioned, or I didn't mention rather, but for the most part, your list is going to be the same no matter what. And that ultimately speaks to the issue that I alluded to. And my issue with Warlock is the fact that there are so many invocations that are, say, tied to Eldritch Blast. Like if I do a quick scan, Agonizing Blast requires you to take the Eldritch Blast cantrip. Eldritch Spear requires you to take the Eldritch Blast cantrip. Grasp of Adar, Eldritch Blast cantrip. Lance of Lethargy, Eldritch Blast cantrip. I think there's one more. Repelling Blast, Eldritch Blast cantrip. So that is 5 invocations that require you to take Eldritch Blast, and there's maybe 15 total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. All right, so there's a little more than 30, but like a sixth of your invocations are tied to Eldritch Blast. So you feel like, I'd say more often than not, that Eldritch Blast is going to be your go-to move if you want to use if you want to use cantrips. Sure, you could use Shocking Grasp or Toll the Dead, and that would be great, but it never will deal as much damage as Eldritch Blast will. And that, in my mind, is ultimately the crux of the, or sort of the flaw of the Warlock. In that, like, it's pretty much a requirement that you take Eldritch Blast to do things. And if it's not a choice, don't make it a choice. That's my biggest RPG design thing that I've been toting for a while. Like, if the thing is not a choice, like, I have to take this because so many of my options are tied to it, then it's not really ultimately a choice. It's a given. And then if it's a given, just give it to them, right? Maybe you should just start as level 1 with Eldritch Blast as a cantrip. Not a choice to take it or not, and then have all these invocations tied to it. And this will all come out in my Fixing the Warlock video when I get to it at one point. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. So thank you all so much for watching. It is still Tuesday the 9th, hopefully by the time you're watching this. So if you haven't gone to my Twitch channel, at 9 p.m. Eastern time tonight, we will be going live on Twitch, and I will be doing a giveaway of the Mythic Odysseys of Theros D&D Beyond version of that book. So it exists. I will be giving that out tonight sometime during the stream, so I would love if you would come out and check that out. That would be awesome. And hey, you have a chance to enter that giveaway. There's also another giveaway that's going until the end of next week, where you'll also be able to get a copy. I'm giving away 3 different copies, so for people who can't attend live tonight. So hopefully you can, and I'll see you out there. I get to enjoy some of me and my friends playing D&D, and also get a chance to win a free book. So thank you once again to Hero Forge for sponsoring this particular video, and thank you to my patrons for continuing to sponsor me and having this have been the 3rd most voted video from a few weeks back. So thank you to them. If you haven't subscribed already, we're eking in on 40,000 subscribers at this point, shooting for 50K by my birthday on July 12th, but who knows, right? We'll see. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.